Hello ladies and gentlemen, Gapesty here. This is the Normal and Heroic tank guide for Brackenspore. And this is a kind of interesting fight for tanking. You have the normal 2-tank and trade-off mechanics, but the main concern is positioning. Positioning of yourself, positioning of the boss, positioning of yourself related to the boss, as well as how that relates to the raid throughout the fight, because there's a lot of movement necessary based on the spawn locations of various mushrooms around the room. So let's get started. Now before we talk about positioning, we have to talk about Necrotic Breath, which is the most dangerous ability for tanks on this encounter. When the boss uses Necrotic Breath, he will do a conal breath attack, so it will hit the current tank, of course, plus anyone that happens to be in front. He also will channel this ability for the duration, meaning that the tank can turn the boss during it and, face him away from anybody that might be getting hit by the first tick or two. The other big important note is that Necrotic Breath does a lot of damage on the tank. And while it is active, it will reduce all healing effects on the tank by 99%. So what this means is for yourself as a tank, you'll want to do your best to make sure your health is topped off before the breath hits, and not be afraid to use any personal cooldowns during it if you're tanking the boss. This is particularly important if you're transitioning and you still have the other big add, the Flesh Eater, which we'll talk about in a moment. The next mechanic is Rot, which is the main tank swap mechanic. And as is standard, it stacks up on the current tank, and you'll want to swap around 4 or 5 stacks. Seems to be a pretty good number. Just be wary that the tank that is grabbing Brackenspore when you swap is not going to face the boss into other raid members at the same time that a breath is going to occur. So you can tank swap when breaths are happening, but it's generally a better idea to wait until one was used, or it's not going to happen for a while before you swap, so that the new tank on Brackenspore can position and face him properly. Now you also want to pick up the Flesh Eater spawns, and these spawn one at a time from down by the water, which is sort of behind me in this shot here. And when they appear after about 5 seconds or so, they will start to cast Decay. And Decay is an interruptible cast, but failing to interrupt it causes a massive spike of damage on the entire raid. And it's cast frequently enough that it requires 2 people rotating interrupts on the Flesh Eater while it's active to take care of them. Usually raids will have DPS focus on this, because having tanks do it can be awkward when you're tank swapping between the add and the boss. But certainly be aware of that as a tank, that while you're tanking the Flesh Eater, and therefore not tanking the boss, you can help with interrupts on the Decay cast. Otherwise, the Flesh Eater doesn't do anything to think about, so it's just another thing that should be tanked, and you have to swap between that and the boss when appropriate. Finally, we'll discuss mushrooms and the overall positioning that you'll need to practice while tanking this fight. So throughout the entire encounter, you'll see along the edges, but also in random locations, there'll be green creeping moss that will spawn, and this should be covered by 2 assigned DPS, usually ranged DPS, to burn it out. However, if you notice that creeping moss is approaching your position where you're tanking one of the mobs, pull the mob away immediately, because if the moss is allowed to stay underneath one of the mobs, even the boss, it will heal that creature pretty significantly. So just communicate with your raid members who have the flamethrowers to take care of it. The other big positional requirement is moving the boss as well as the add near the mushrooms, both living and rejuvenating mushrooms, when it's appropriate. Generally, the tactic is to save a living mushroom until just before the boss reaches 100 energy, at which time he will cast his big dot, which is infesting spores. And during this period, the raid will be stacked up inside the living mushroom. As a tank, you do not necessarily need to be in the living mushroom, but if you're confident that you will not breathe on the raid, you will not have Necrotic Breath hit the raid, you can also stay in it. Because the boss channels during infesting spore, it's generally okay once the cast has begun to stand in it yourself. Just make sure you face him away after the cast is ended before he does breath. The same goes for the tank that's on the Flesh Eater. Obviously, the Flesh Eater facing doesn't matter, so you're free to stand in the mushroom. And then the other mushroom, Rejuvenating, also is very beneficial. In this case, it will heal, or excuse me, it will regenerate mana as well as provide a massive haste boost to those standing inside it. Not quite as important for tanks to be inside it, but you do need to pull the creatures nearby these mushrooms, just like the living, so that your raid can benefit from the massive DPS increase. So just constantly be moving to the new mushrooms, get in position and ready to be near them when the time comes. Watch the positioning and facing for the breath casts, and you should be good to go. So kind of an interesting fight for tanking, but that is the normal tank guide for Brackenspore. As always, thanks for watching, good luck, and see you next time.